Your friend in Central Illinois. WHOW.
Top of the morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm your host today, Seth Lawrence. The WHW Morning Show streams to Facebook and YouTube. It's brought to you by Peterson Insurance, your Pekin Insurance agent in Clinton. My guest on the phone today is Mrs. Mary Vogt. She is the superintendent of Bement Schools. Mrs. Vogt, good morning. Happy New Year, first of all. How are you today?
Thank you, Seth. Happy New Year to you as well. I'm doing great, thanks, and hope you are too.
Definitely. We appreciate you making time for us. I see you didn't call your kids off of school today, Mrs. Vogt. That's disappointing. You made those kids drudge through all this snow to get to school today.
Uphill both ways.
Uphill both ways. So I was telling my last guest in here, I've got Mr. Nettles, our superintendent up here. I've got him on the texting machine, and fired it up this morning. I woke up and walked into the bathroom, and I look out the window, and there's snow on the ground. And so I know Mr. Nettles is up at that hour, so I didn't feel bad texting him. I said, it's awfully snowy out there. I really think you should make the kids stay home today. And he said, nope, I just ran a country mile and they'll be fine. So no sympathy up here for those kids that have to go through it all.
No, I did not run a country mile, but I saw that the snow was not on the roads or the sidewalk, so I felt like it was safe.
Well, I don't know. I feel like even then you might run into a slick spot, Mrs. Vogt. Like, I don't know. I just think you guys need to have a little more compassion for these kids. Goodness gracious. I'm totally kidding. But at any rate, Mrs. Vogt, let's dive into as we get back to, normal times out of COVID, a lot of what superintendents did when, we were not worrying about COVID was watching in Springfield for what the legislature was doing and new mandates and requirements to be put on school. And with a new General Assembly on the horizon and a lame duck session just wrapped up, there is some of that to be talked about here for today. What is top of mind for you, Mrs. Vogt, as you think about what the legislature is taking up right now in Springfield?
Sure. So as you mentioned, the lame duck session did just end. When it ended, there's House Bill 5188 that would have required all Illinois school districts to provide comprehensive personal health and safety education and comprehensive sexual health education starting July 1st, 2023, without an option to opt out of the implementation. So you might remember back in 2021, the bill that was passed did allow groups to remove their opposition to the inclusion of that bill because districts would be able to opt out. So now with what was being proposed, it removed that provision allowing districts to opt out and also required July 1, 2023 full implementation for required curriculum. So when the lame duck session ended, that bill was not called for a full vote. So as administrators, we appreciate that, because to have a requirement as such without the option to opt out would have put quite a bit of it's just a burden on our educators to try to prepare to teach something that, let's face it, me as a mom, I'm going to take care of those conversations in my house when I feel like my personal children are ready to have, the personal health and sexual health education discussions. And, it's one of those, I don't feel 100% relief, because I do think this is going to come up again. We do have new members of the legislation, and they're in the committee. Just some of the information I saw was that this did pass 11-6 in the committee, but several of the committee members indicated that they would not be able to vote for it on the floor unless there were additional changes. So I feel like probably what's happening is there is some discussion, some additional changes that will take place, but I just feel so strongly that local control is so important. And when there are mandates put out there without the option to opt out or without the option for a waiver, it really ties our hands.
Maybe it's my lack of understanding of government, but like it doesn't make any sense to me. Like you pass it out of committee, you vote for it in committee, and then you come out and say, "But I can't vote for it on the floor." Well, why
Right.
even push it out of committee?
That's
And maybe
right.
I don't know. I could be very very wrong on like the process and how it plays out, but like that just does not make any sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, just, as you're saying that, an image popped into my mind. It's kind of like, in middle school, you get your group of friends together, you're all sitting there face to face talking, and everyone all agrees with each other. But then, you get away from that group, and can do a more anonymous-ish discussion, and then you really vote your conscience and what is right. So.
Uh-huh.
If that's what the committee meetings are like, I don't know. I've never been in it.
Yeah, right. I don't know. But there's a couple of conversations to have off of this. Again, our guest on the phone this morning is Mrs. Mary Vogt. She is the superintendent of Bement schools. Sex education, just kind of on the surface, like that sounds, innocent enough. And maybe parents would not be so, just hearing that, not knowing the curriculum, they might say, oh, well, it's, like I agree with Mrs. Vogt when she says we need to have these conversations at home, but, to further the conversation in the classroom, I don't see the harm in that. But this is
No.
very, very graphic stuff that you're talking about, Mrs. Vogt. There's, for I believe as young as first or second grade, you're talking about some very, mature topics that, I've got a second grader. My second grader is not ready for the conversation that is being pushed on Illinois schools. I would have a very, very hard time being convinced that this is a conversation that's necessary for the classroom.
Right. And Seth, there are, I mean, name it. It could even be the color of the sky. I just find, and you and I have talked about this, people have become, I feel, unreasonable in the way they approach a topic that they disagree with somebody else. So for those people who feel very strongly that this is inappropriate, it should not be happening, then there are the people saying, well, it's not happening in every home. It's not being discussed, and it's our responsibility to make sure that the schools are teaching this.
Mm-hmm.
And so often I feel like schools get caught in that political crossfire.
Mm-hmm.
That, that's not why I wanted to become an educator. I wanted to become an educator to teach children and support children, and for them to know you have a person in your life who you can always count on.
Yeah.
I think education to be in the crosshairs of politics, but the older I've gotten and the more experience I've gained, that's exactly where we sit. And we just have to be so careful about, protecting our positions and not bringing, personal feelings into it, and just sticking with the facts. So right now, we can still opt out of this. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Aaron's Law that has been in place for a few years, and now there's Faith's Law that is coming up, and I feel like those also deal with very sensitive topics surrounding sexual misconduct.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to real quick, Mrs. Vogt, you beat me to the other point I wanted to make with this morning, and it's almost like, I don't know if it's a societal thing or if it's government has evolved itself to where they feel it necessary to be, the primary stakeholder in raising a kid, and perhaps it's a little bit of both, because, you mentioned a good point. Not every household has the parent or parents willing to have these conversations. Not every household has, maybe the sense of, when the appropriate time is to have this conversation. Like, not every kid is going to have the conversation at home that needs to be had in the home. So, that leads to, well, okay, then then society, we need to, as a community, we need to have that conversation with this child. And so, maybe it's a little bit of an evolution of both things, or one causes the other, or vice versa. But we've gotten to a point where it's almost like, and you made a good point, the schools are kind of in the crosshairs of this political fire, where we have to turn to the schools to teach kids things that perhaps shouldn't be taught in schools. That's not the purpose of schools, if that makes any sense.
Correct. And so I don't want to give the impression that parents aren't taking responsibility and doing what they're supposed to do. It comes down to comfort level as well. I was not raised in a house where these conversations happened openly. I was the youngest of 4 girls. My parents counted on my sisters to have these discussions with me. They were of a generation where you don't talk about this. You don't talk about personal hygiene. That's just not how my parents were raised. So my 3 sisters took care of me. But I learned from that, and having 2 daughters, and have established that with them, that you can ask me anything, and if I can't answer it, I'll help you find the answer, or I will find somebody who can have that discussion with you. So I think so often parents are able to publicly ridicule and criticize schools, but schools are not able to tell parents how to parent. And that's the long and short of it. Mm-hmm. That if a school is doing something that the government is telling us we have to do, and parents don't agree with it, they can get out there and say, I don't agree with this, you're wrong. Mm-hmm. If we have a child who comes to school and asks a question that, in my personal opinion, hey, you should really be talking to your parents about that. But if the parent isn't comfortable, well, I can't just get out there and say, hey, parent, you need to learn about this. You need to talk to your child. So it's an interesting position that we're in. It's
interesting. We've gotten to where you can't tell the parents they have to be a parent. Like that's what that boils down to me for, at least. Like, you had this child, you have to raise them. Like, it's your duty, it's your responsibility. Do what you may not have signed up for it, but that's part of the gig. You know what I mean?
And the laws requiring, the immunizations, the dental checkups, there's nothing wrong with that. The intent is good, but schools have been put in the position to oversee parents taking responsibility for their child's health. Mm-hmm.
Well, Mrs. Vogt, I'll tell you what, you mentioned Faith's Law. Let's take a time out and dive into that on the other side of the break, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you.
Mary Vogt, Superintendent of Bement Schools, my guest on the phone. We've got more with her coming your way on the WHOW Morning Show.
WHOW.
For Illinois agriculture.
Let's check the markets now on the RFD Radio Network. I'm Jim Taylor. Corn slightly higher, beans mostly higher, wheat slightly lower. March corn 672 1/4 up 1 1/4. May corn up 1 1/4, 670 3/4. July corn 661 3/4 up 1/4. January beans 1525 1/2 down 4. March beans up 6, 1524 1/2. May beans 1522 1/2 up 3 1/4. March Chicago wheat 742 down 3/4. May wheat down 1/4. 750 1/2. January bean meal 514.30 up 130. January bean oil 63.25 up 86 cents. Livestock market, January feeders 181.10 down to $1.02. February live cattle 157.17 down 37 cents. February lean hogs 77.87 down 87 cents. In the energy market, February crude oil 78.78 up 39 cents. Jim Taylor, RFD Radio Network.
New trucks and SUVs are here. This is Scott Baum from Baum Chevrolet Buick in Clinton. Yes, we've been waiting, and now we have new inventory on our lot for you to see, with more arriving weekly. Plan your next new Chevrolet purchase. Just click on the pre-order tab. You'll see Silverados in 1500, 2500, and 3500. We have Equinoxes and Trailblazers as well. New Chevrolet inventory in stock now at Baum Chevrolet Buick in Clinton. BaumChevyBuick.com, right from the start.
MR Systems Wireless is your local internet provider for Clinton and surrounding area. They have the products you want and the local service you deserve. MR Systems Wireless Internet service for home or business includes unlimited data, unlimited streaming, and unlimited calling. Plans start at just $48 a month and get a free Roku 4 lease with our media packages. Get the speed you need with MR Systems Wireless. Call them at 935-2100. That's 935-2100 for MR Systems Wireless.
Your friend in Central Illinois, WHOW.
Once again, a good morning. Thanks for being with us. I'm your host today, Seth Lawrence. The WHOW Morning Show streams to Facebook and YouTube, brought to you by Peterson Insurance, your Pekin Insurance agent in Clinton. Mrs. Mary Vogt is the superintendent of Bement Schools, my guest in studio for today. And Mrs. Vogt, you mentioned Faith's Law. Tell us about Faith's Law. What is this all about?
Yes. So Faith's Law comes from a situation where there was sexual misconduct, abuse that took place. The person the bill is named after is Faith Colson, and just some information from the press releases from her. Her goal was to work with the legislation to prevent other students from suffering as she did. And the hope is that schools will be safer and protect children and prevent abuse, which is absolutely appropriate. And unfortunately, it is a situation where something like this shouldn't have to become a law. It should just be common practice. So what the legislation is trying to do is adding safeguards, expanding the definition of grooming in the criminal code, increasing resources and protection for sexual abuse survivors, and then requiring school districts to develop a sexual misconduct code of conduct, and then also review employment history and increase training for educators. So, on the surface for school districts, this and for future employees, absolutely, we should be able to hire people who want to work with students and not have inappropriate relationships with them and keep students safe. But some of the fine print, this goes into effect July 1st, 2023. ISBE is to develop a template for school districts to use to contact previous employers. So what that means, starting July 1st, let's say I want to hire a teacher's assistant. That person, is upwards of 30, 40 years old. They have had 5 or 6 different jobs and previous to coming to work for me. And let's say, for example, at 16 years old, they were a lifeguard at a pool. Well, that's working with children. As a school now, I will be required to track down that employer from decades ago to get them to fill out this required template. And then that employer has 20 days in which to reply to say if there had been any allegations of misconduct or if they are not aware of any. So my hope is that those extreme examples are few and far between. But again, it's putting that burden of responsibility then back on the school districts to find employers from quite a while ago. School districts already are conducting fingerprint checks, background checks, checking against the sex offender registration, checking against violent offenders. So it's not that schools aren't doing anything already. There are already a number of safeguards in place so that we're not hiring people who should not be in schools. One of my all-time go-to questions when I'm talking with a previous employer is, do you feel there is any reason that this person is unfit to work in a school district? Fortunately, I've never had a negative answer to that question, but I feel like that's something that protects us. Mm-hmm. So we're in a situation now with Faith's Law that as of July 1st, our research and digging into the person's background is going to become quite a bit more extensive.
Sure. Very good. So when it comes to you mentioned those extreme cases, few and far between, but in the meantime, you have to take care of those. Who is charged with that? Is that more time on the principal's end? Like who is the one that has to take up all this work?
The way the legislation reads is that if the school has a human resources department, then that human resources department would take care of it. Otherwise, it's the superintendent.
Oh, wow. So that falls on you. Good grief. As if you don't have enough going on, Mrs. Vogt.
Yeah. So, in theory, I don't disagree that we need to protect our students. We need to, protect everyone who walks through our doors. But in this day and age, when we are having such a hard time finding educators, that one of my unanswered questions so far is, what if I can't find that employer? What if it's a business, a daycare that's shut down? Am I not going to be able to hire this person if I can't get the answer to that question within 20 days?
Yeah. Ms. Vogt, I hate to do this to you. I have to let you go.
I understand, Seth.
Yeah,
we have great conversations. They go too quickly.
Yeah, I appreciate your time as always. Mary Vogt, superintendent of Bement Schools, our guest. Network News is now.
The Big 1520 WHOW Clinton, 92.3 FM, W222 BG Clinton, 106.5 FM, W293 DJ Normal Bloomington.
News this hour from townhall.com. I'm Rich Thomason. Lives shattered, homes and